hey, I was wrong. It's that one. Well, good evening and welcome to another wonderful episode of Porch Talk. I, of course, am Paul W. Marino, and my new co-host is the one, the only Eugene Michaelenko from Adams. Welcome to the show.
What a pleasure to be here.
And
I won't do that again.
Okay, let's do a slow motion replay. Thank you. Now, we may have a third person coming. I don't know if she will come or not. But even if she doesn't, I think I can pretty much guarantee the two of us can talk for the entire hour.
And we have water to wet our whistle when we go dry.
That's right. So, you wanted to talk about Johnson School.
Yes. But I first want to talk about Ed Morandi. Today, I received a thank you note from his family, and just how it happened on this day, and just before Paul Marino called me, I'm saying, so Ed Morandi is thinking of us, and his presence is here right today. Welcome, Ed.
I'm sure he is overlooking us.
Yeah, I do want to talk about
And maybe
Johnson
in
School.
a literal sense, too. I'm not watching them anymore.
Overlooking us. And I do want to talk about Johnson School. I went to the open house last Saturday.
Yeah,
I
think
was
it was
very
last
impressed.
Saturday. Yeah, I would have gone, but I had somewhere else to be.
Well, you've been there before, and I was just so impressed with the layout. They even preserved portions of the blackboards in every unit, almost every unit.
Mm-hmm.
So you could play right on the blackboards in their apartments.
Mm-hmm.
Great place to leave reminder notes. They thought of everything.
Did they leave the gratings in the walls?
Oh yes, and some the ventilation system. Yes, it's a beautiful building. I was in there. I thinking, oh, that the glory of North Adams. It's this Romanesque style with this great carving in the pillars and all that great woodwork and huge windows and all those beautiful floors. They even preserved the creak. When you walk on the floors, they still creaked. I think they preserved that too.
Yeah, that's great.
And they have a great display there of all the famous people from North Adams. Will Durant, Hess, what was their first name? From the airport?
Oh, yes. Drat, I know who you mean. I can't think
I know,
of
I
it
always
either.
forget those first names. There was like maybe 10 of them.
Lottie Harriman.
Lottie Harriman, okay. Then who was it? There was a Hess also who was involved maybe in a community service. I'm trying to think of, I should have refreshed my memory of all those people, but it's a great display of all the famous people in North
And
Adams.
they had one of Sylvander Johnson, I should hope.
No, they didn't, and you're right. He was
Oh.
missing. I don't recall him.
Well, Sylvander Johnson is the man for whom the Johnson Grays were named.
Right.
And he is also the man that they named their bivouac after.
Right.
If you go to the Marshall Street gate of Masmoka, there's a sign saying this was Camp Johnson.
And his mausoleum is built into the hill. It's brick and it's got these
Yes.
Egyptian type of decorations on it.
I don't think it's Egyptian. It's and mostly an iron door, but it has bronze hinges.
Yeah. I thought it had big columns, but I'll have to look again. But it's right on Route 2. It's got high
Yeah.
visibility.
So
So,
when that school was built, it was the last of 4 big neighborhood schools that the town built.
Can you name them?
Although when that one was built, we were by then a city.
all right.
And so
96.
it was the first big neighborhood school built by the city. And they named those schools after great industrialists, hopefully to encourage the children that went to those schools to aspire to the greatness that these men achieved.
And it was also local too, because Sylvander's Mill was down on Brown Street, right?
Yes.
So, and now the Freeman School was near the Freeman Manufacturing Company on
Yes.
River Street.
And there was Houghton for Houghton School. And there was also Brayton.
Brayton. Oh,
Braytonville, they named it after one of the Braytons.
And I believe Brayton has a connection with South Adams, briefly. Then he moved to the North Village, and that's where his fame is.
So the one thing that I disapprove of about Johnson School is that I went there, well, both my brothers went there K to 8, and I went there K through 6. No one ever told us who Johnson was and why they would have named a school after him.
They probably didn't know.
Well, that's entirely possible. When I went to Freeman for 7th and 8th grade, they did not tell us who Freeman was and why a school would have been named after him, but neither did they tell us anything about the monument in the front yard. Today, the school is gone, but that monument is still there.
Oh, that's good.
It was erected in the 1920s in honor of the longtime principal of the school, Rose Sherry. She died unexpectedly in the early 20s, and a couple of years later, the entire school came together, by which I mean the faculty, the staff, the students, and the school board came together to erect this monument in her memory. And it's got a bronze tablet on it. It used to have a sundial on it.
Oh. Are there photographs of the event?
No. I do have the article, but I also have some photos that I took of it when I remembered it, and I was up there, and the boulder's still there, the school is gone, and I can't help but wonder, why in blazes didn't they name the school after her?
Right.
You know, if they didn't know who Freeman was and didn't bother telling anyone, well, hey, here's another teacher. Well, of course, she was a woman.
That's true, you don't. Yeah. In Adams, the schools were named after the streets. So there's Commercial Street, Hoosick Street, Liberty Street, Holland Avenue, and the other, Renfrew is just a section of town. But I think Renfrew, the manufacturing company, may have had some money involved in it, so they got their name put on it.
Yeah, that could be.
But they didn't name them after the famous industrialists of Adams. Oh, we do have C.T. Plunkett Junior High, which has now been changed to Hoosick Valley Elementary School. Mm-hmm. And that's because C.T. Plunkett, he bought, L.L. Brown's house was on that location, and it had deteriorated for over a period of years. He tore down the house, and he donated the land to the town and said, build a school here. And it was great because there was already an elementary school across the street and a high school on the other side of the street as well. And it came to they got most of it done, and they needed still extra money to build the auditorium and the gymnasium. And they said, oh, we ran out of money, we can't do it. And C.T. Plunkett pulled out his checkbook and wrote a check to complete the project. So he was a very generous man,
cool.
A very generous man in Adams. He also built the nurse's house and the maternity wing at the Plunkett Hospital, and he donated a lot of money.
So who built the hospital?
His brother, William, built it in memory of his wife, Lydia, who had died in 1908 or something like that. And when he built the hospital, it was, let's see, three things happened actually. One, while the hospital was under construction, he died on a train outside of Pittsburgh. And his son died 3 months later in December. And also, it was the beginning of the Spanish influenza epidemic. So it opened in March. the epidemic started happening in September, and so the hospital had this outrageous mortality rate. More people died there in that 1 year than they could, give a bad impression about the hospital, how many people died in the hospital.
Well, while we're talking about history, two things, well, actually, three things, because I have a connection to Plunkett myself.
The school?
No, the
family?
hospital.
Oh, the hospital, oh, yeah.
But I'm going to get to that after we do the local history quiz. Dave, would you please put the photo in front of us? Okay, now, the question is, and remember, you are not allowed to say anything about this until the last 5 minutes of the show.
I vow.
Good. The question is, where is this charming pond? All I will say is it's in northern Berkshire, and it was a very popular place. And so, if you have an idea, if you have a wild guess, if you know what it is, please give us a call here at 664-4408. Oh, come on, join in. 664-4408. And if you call in with a shot in the dark or with the correct answer, as long as you give us the correct answer, you will have bragging rights for the next 2 weeks.
Tip of our hat.
All right. So the two things that I'm related to in relation to Plunkett Hospital is that's where my brother Ralph was born.
Why there? Why not North Adams?
Well, because that's where all my mother's friends were at the time.
Oh, your mother was a nurse, right?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
She trained at
Mercy
No, don't tell me. I can get this. I'll remember.
I wanted to guess.
No, at Deaconess in Boston.
The big city.
And when she graduated, she and a friend both got jobs at Plunkett. So they were working there. And once they got settled in, they decided we should get to know the area. So they took the trolley. Now, I don't mean they actually took it and drove it themselves with the operator running after them. Hey, come back with my train. No, they rode the trolley to North Adams, and they went to Abraham Shapiro, who had started out in the first decade of the 20th century dealing in livestock, and then he started dealing in cars. And so...
The rest is history.
Yeah, well, yes, it is. They went to his shop and found a car they liked, and he sold it to them. And then, hold on to your hats, folks, then they said to him, can you recommend someone to teach us how to drive it? And that constantly blows my mind that my ultra-practical mother would be airheaded enough to buy a car without first knowing how to drive. Well, apparently there was a lot of that going on because at that time, dealers could provide driving lessons. And so when a certain salesman got back from lunch, Mr. Shapiro told him, a couple of nurses bought a car this morning. You're going to teach them to drive it. He said, oh, no, I'm not. And he said, oh, yes, you are. The lessons took about a week. And on the last day, he asked my mother to marry him.
What a beautiful story.
Oh, it gets better. A couple of years before she died, she told me that when he first drove the car up to the nurse's house and he saw her coming down the path, that's when he decided, she's the one I want to marry.
And we're filming right now in the Shapiro
Yes.
showroom. Is this, yeah.
Yes.
On Union Street. And
Yeah. Can't think of his name.
Sonny? No. Sonny
Well,
Van the
no,
other-
at
Sonny
any
Van
rate, the one that owned this was Abraham's youngest son.
Yeah. I was born in Plunkett Memorial Hospital. I added them up. I think there's something like 9,800 babies that were born there from 1922 to 1973. 1973 was the last year that babies were born there. So after that, everybody else is now born in North Adams or Pittsfield or at home.
Yeah, that does happen, home births. One of our neighbors over on School Street was born at home. And I think she was a breech baby. And they came running across the street to get my mother. And she delivered her, gave her her first bath.
Oh. It's always good to have a nurse in the neighborhood.
Yes, indeed. Gee, she could have made extra money as a midwife.
Yeah. Back to Johnson School. It's done by, the developer is David Morazi. Now, is he connected to all the big Morazis in North Adams, Dr. Joe and John from
That
Sprague's?
I do not know. We'd have to ask him.
Because there was one was a city councilor, and you took trips to the old country, took people to the Tremosine, and the other one was ran Sprague companies all over the United States. So it's good to see there's a local boy, if it is, once again helping the community that he grew up in.
Oh, yes.
And plus he's preserving all these wonderful buildings, the NORAD Mill, Johnson School, the list goes on here. I can remember the list. He's now going to start Notre Dame.
Well, something I'd like to see happen with that is make the basement into a working theater.
Oh.
You know, when urban renewal reared its ugly head for the second time in the 70s, the city council was really going overboard in deciding what should be torn down. We lost the Paramount Theater, which was originally the Empire Theater, actually the Empire Mark II, and there was a fire in there in the backstage area, but it was contained behind a fireproof screen. So the rest of the theater was in excellent condition. It had a full stage with dressing rooms, plus the movie screen, and the city council said no, and they used that fire as an excuse to tear it down.
Oh.
And the other building that was in excellent condition was the YMCA. It was the only building in North Adams with a true air shaft. And I remember going by there after it was closed, and they had signs up warning people to stay away because it's a breeding ground for rats. And again, this was just an excuse. I was all over the inside of that building. I never saw any wildlife.
We sort of had that in Adams with the Castle Rathconner. There was a priest, Father O'Connor, who, with some help of, some of them were seminarians, and one was George Fassel, who was the church sexton, and they built this castle. It looked like a castle, and it was modeled after his ancestral castle in Ireland. and he was going to open a school there in Adams, and this is where the Columbia Valley Housing Authority is, on the corner of Valley and Columbia Street. And he died all of a sudden on, I believe it was New Year's Eve. He died in his sleep, and so here was a parish left with this building that was vacant, and it was a huge. It was a portion of it on the Valley Street side. It had 6 stories, and the front side had this castellated trim on the top and a big driveway up it, and it was quite spectacular. Anyhow, it was in his will, and so it was sold to somebody in Rhode Island, and somehow it came back into the diocese hands. But my thought is that there were already 2 Catholic schools in Adams. I think some priest says we don't need a third one. I think at that time, actually, almost half the kids in Adams were educated in Catholic schools, and the public schools educated maybe a little bit, maybe 60% of the population. And I think that you hear these Catholics were paying for education for their own kids in their church, and they're also paying for their tax dollars. I think the people, the parishioners of St. Thomas who controlled that area said, we're not going to fund another school and send our kids still to a public school. Anyhow, they came up with the idea, and they said that it was built on sand and that it was unsafe, and they said it was unfit to be occupied. So the building never was occupied, and it was there until about after World War II, and Stanley Krudiak had a contracting business, and he had an agreement with the diocese that he would tear down the building as long as he could take the gravel and the sand out of that area. So for the longest time, it was a big sand pit, and there was they just kept on removing sand until.
Any photos of it remaining?
Oh yeah, there is. Yep.
Oh, excellent.
Yep.
And speaking of photos, you told me once that Mark Twain was in Adams.
Yes.
Any photos of that?
No, unfortunately. He
Well,
visited.
let's hear the story.
He supposedly visited Adams 2 or 3 times. Once as a performance, and he was the second. He was the opener. He wasn't the main show, but he had just. It was at the time between when he wrote Adventures of Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn. So Tom Sawyer was already out, and I don't think Huckleberry Finn had come out yet. So he had some notoriety. And he spoke in what is our old town hall. Old town hall on the 2nd floor, there was a auditorium, and they called the place the Opera House. And he spoke there. And the headliner was his last name was Gable, and he was a Southerner, so he would talk about the old South and Dixie and all that stuff. And this all happened shortly after the town hall was built in the 1880s, 85, 86, something like that. And I think it was before Mark Twain had real, he could command a bigger speaking fee. But he was also interested in, Ella Brown had imported, the paper company, had imported a family of handmade paper makers. At the time, paper was always made by machine, and he somehow thought there was a market for handmade paper. And this family, they were called the Normans, set up a handmade paper operation in the mill that is now the mill houses on Commercial Street. And Mark Twain was interested in things like that. And he supposedly came here, and I believe he actually bought some of their handmade paper to have one of his books printed on.
Cool. Yeah, neat story.
He was also involved in the early linotype machines, the automatic typesetting machines at the time that were made out, you'd punch in letters and they would come out as lead type, and they could then set whole galleys of information on that. He supported some guy who had one copyright patent, but Mergenthaler had another patent, and Mergenthaler's linotype machine superseded the other guy's patent, and so Mark Twain lost money in that deal. But Mark Twain, I think, was also involved in the invention of the typewriter, or investment in the typewriter as well.
That could be.
No.
I haven't heard that, but it's easy enough to
Google
look
it.
up. I will do that. The other thing I have here, I have the story that relates to Johnson School. When I was in 6th grade, I wrote a story for English titled The Super Yeast.
The super
Yeast.
yeast?
Yes. A scientist invents a super yeast. His wife uses some to bake bread, and it fills the whole house until it stops. And, well, thank goodness that's over. And the youngest child says, "Ain't not, Mommy. How you going to bake it all?"
That's right.
All right, so
I thought they would never go hungry again, that the bread was always, they'd always have bread in the house.
and linotype machine.
Oh, I thought you were going to look up the typewriter.
Loses money backing the history of information. All right. I'll go back and do typewriter.
I'd like to know where the last linotype machine was operated in northern Berkshire. I know White Eagle Printing Company still was using one as late as, I don't know, 2001. But I don't know if there was any other one out there. I know Bill
I
Elder from
think
McClellan's, and I think they had already, when they abandoned their linotype
I
machine.
think the college's newspaper was using a linotype.
Really? Yeah. Ancient technology in the printing industry.
Mark Twain, come on. Washington Post.
There's been other authors who've come to Adams too. Who has the house in Lenox? Edith Wharton. Edith Wharton came here, Fruits of Labor, I think she wrote, and talked about a mansion on an abandoned mansion in Adams. And I think that abandoned mansion was Ella Brown's house. And she had met with the Plunketts, and I believe she was not impressed with the Plunketts at all, and maybe had written bad things about them in this novel called Fruits of Labor. It definitely was anti-major industrialist and the factory system that existed here at that time.
Mark Twain's typewriter, full of defects, devilish ones, nearly drove him bonkers.
Oh, maybe he had
He
trouble with
made history by writing Life on the Mississippi on the newfangled typing machine. Nice picture of him.
Too bad
Looks
that-
a little grumpy, but then again, this is a story about love, hate, and Mark Twain. The object of Twain's desire, then resentment, the typewriter. And so on.
Well,
Oh, he laid eyes on a Remington and a Boston store window. The machines were somewhat reliable, at least according to salesmen. They were given a demonstration. Yeah, that reminds me of a time that Dave and I went to, that's Dave Fabiano, and I went to a television conference, and I was looking at something, and Dave told me, ask the salesman to show you the editor. You know, it was a digital editor. So I went over and, oh yes, and he zip, 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 zip. Too fast to follow, just to show you how wonderful this machine is.
they do that, yeah.
Yeah. So the salesman explained to them that it could do 57 words a minute. So he put his type girl to work, and we timed her by the watch. She actually did the 57 in 60 seconds.
And was it accurate, though? That was always in your typing class lessons.
Who knows?
You could type so many words a minute, but it had to be accurate.
Yeah. We were partly convinced, but said it probably couldn't happen again. But it did. We timed the girl over and over again with the same result always. She won out. The price was $125. He bought it on the spot.
$125. That's probably more expensive than a computer is today.
Yeah. Twain fell out of love rather swiftly. It was degrading to my character, he later wrote via dictation in his autobiography. Instead of virtues, he found the machine to be full of caprices, full of defects, devilish ones.
Oh.
He gave his machine to his writer pal, William Dean Howells. My morals began to improve, Twain said.
When was the last time you used a typewriter? And
I would say that was in
1980.
Yeah, probably the late 1980s.
Yeah.
And I started becoming computer literate. And so my mother's typewriter and my grandfather's went up in the barn.
We have some footage from 1940 from a movie that Adams Lions Club produced, and it is of Lucille Grew typing on a typewriter in the transcript office in Adams, and it's almost ballet with her typing away. And ding! Oh, the old typewriters.
Yeah, that's cool. Oh, he did come back to the typewriter. In 1883, Life on the Mississippi was completed on the machine.
The more he tried to get out, the more I pulled him back in.
Yeah. Please do not use my name, Twain wrote. I don't want people to know I own this curiosity-breeding little joker.
Wow.
So, we still don't have any callers. Come on. There are two of you watching. One of you should at least call in to take a guess at that photo. Where was that photo taken? You're going to kick yourself if you know the answer and you didn't call in.
Let's repeat the telephone number.
Yes, give us a call at 664-4408. Gosh, you're good at that.
I'm in the choir, so I can follow the lead.
Yeah. Would you like to hear the story I brought?
Sure, why
It
not?
is not a long story, but you remember the story I told you about the super yeast
Yes.
that I wrote in 6th grade. That story recurred to me, and this is what I did with it. New title is Evolution. If there is one thing about evolution, it's that it's forever. The entire universe, every galaxy, every cluster, every solar system, every star, every planet, every life form, from the simplest to the most complex, are in a constant state of flux. It takes a long, long time, but everything is constantly growing, constantly changing, constantly altering. They develop new features, new systems, find out what works and what doesn't. What works is incorporated. What doesn't is discarded. It's all part of the process.
You're quite the philosopher.
Thank you. Marjorie Benning was not thinking of this. What she was thinking of was bread. She had learned to bake bread 30 years before when she was 8 years old. Even then, she had not been thinking of expanding her horizons, though that was exactly what she was doing. She thought it was just a fun way to spend time with her grandmother. Now, it was a favorite activity, one that she was good at. Like the process of evolution itself, she often tweaked her recipe, experimenting with ways to improve it. First, she poured a quantity of orange juice in a bowl and left it to come to room temperature. While that was happening, she measured out her flour and added a little salt, then grated the zest of 2 oranges into the flour. When that was mixed, she poured a packet of dry yeast into the orange juice, whisked it in, and set it aside to bloom. While she was waiting, she got out her kneading cloth and 2 bread pans. When the yeast had bloomed, she poured the liquid into the flour and worked it into a dough. She greased a bowl, put the ball of dough into it, covered it, and set it in a warm place to rise. The dough, she knew, would take about an hour to rise, so she set out to do some yard work, unaware that she was not the only one to be experimenting that day. What had eluded her was sufficiently subtle that it would have been impossible to notice, but it was no less significant. Indeed, what happened was comparable to the age-old question of the chicken and the egg, as in, which came first? The answer, according to evolution, is simple. One day a bird that was very like a chicken, but not one, laid an egg. When the egg hatched, the new bird that came out of it was, in fact, a chicken. For untold generations, a certain species of bird became more and more like chickens until the quote-unquote final generation consisted entirely of chickens. Of course, there is no such thing as a final generation unless the line goes extinct. While she had been waiting for the yeast to bloom, some unexpected guests joined the party in the form of numerous spores of wild yeast that floated in from outdoors and settled into the orange juice. These yeasts immediately helped themselves to the sugars present in the juice and began reproducing, as did the active dry yeast that Marjorie had put in. Then, as the wild yeasts began breeding with the domestic yeast, they produced a new strain. While this strain was similar to its predecessors in many ways, it was also entirely itself. It fed voraciously and reproduced with equal rapidity. The dough doubled in size within 20 minutes. If Marjorie had come back at that time, she would have been pleasantly surprised and proceeded to knead, divide, and set up her bread to rise again before baking. But she did not. Instead, the new yeast overwhelmed its forebears and continued reproducing at a geometric rate. In 20 minutes' time, the dough was overflowing the bowl and spreading over the counter. As it grew, it pressed against the jars that stood against the wall until one of the largest tipped over. The lid fell off and its contents, white sugar, poured out onto the dough. By this time, the yeast was in need of a fresh source of food. As if it had a mind, the dough followed the sugar, oozing into the jar, and kept on growing. When Marjorie came back to check on her dough, she had been gone more than an hour. She was not concerned, as the longer the dough rose, the bigger and fluffier her bread would be, or so she thought. When she saw the length to which the dough had risen, she screamed. It was nothing she could help. It was merely a knee-jerk reaction. The dough now covered the entire counter, had expanded into the sink, and sagged over the counter's edge and spread onto the floor. Once past her knee-jerk response, she stood in the doorway and stared, partly in awe and partly in disbelief. To her satisfaction, it smelled wonderful, full and yeasty with a hint of orange. If she was able to bake any of it, the bread would be fabulous. Though, of course, the key word was if. On top of the counter, the dough was high enough to press against the bottom of the cupboard doors. It'll have those open in a minute, she thought. So a minute later, she was only mildly surprised to see the middle door start to swing open. It was a disquieting thing to see, though she was certain the dough couldn't do any damage in there. The cupboard contained little more than seasonings, just a jar of molasses, a bottle of corn syrup, another of maple syrup, and a box of brown sugar. As she watched the dough spread slowly over the floor, she tried to figure out what to do. She was accustomed to throwing out dough that had failed, such as when the yeast died prematurely. But this? It unsettled her that she didn't know whom she should call. The police? If she dialed 911 and told them what was happening, they might come, but they'd bring a straitjacket. As she thought, she watched the dough slowly push the cupboard door open further. She could almost see the dough growing. Speaking of which, while she was watching the cupboard door swing wider, one of her kitchen chairs called for her attention. The dough on the floor was pressing against its legs and budged it with an audible sound. To hell with this. She went outside and pulled out her cell phone. 911, what is your emergency? This is Marjorie Benning at 99 Lewis Street. There's something strange going on in my house. What is it, ma'am? Well, I'm not sure how to describe it. Do you have an intruder? Something like that. Is the intruder still in the house, ma'am? Oh, yes. Are you in the house? No, I'm in the backyard. Stay there, ma'am. I have a squad car on the way. For the time being, that was good news. The question was, would it be good news after the police saw her kitchen? The squad car pulled up. 2 officers jumped out and came to the door. Marjorie led them around the house and pointed toward the door. Guns drawn, the men marched into the house. A moment later, she heard them shouting obscenities. Well, at least it's not my imagination, she thought. The officers popped out the back door. What the hell's going on here? One of them demanded. I honestly don't know, Marjorie replied. What is that blob? Bread dough, she answered, though she had to admit that it did put her in mind of a Blob movie. She talked with the officers for a while until they decided to call the fire department. By the time they arrived, the dough had fed on the crystallized sugar on the molasses jar and the maple syrup bottle. Encouraged by this meager repast, it had gotten into the brown sugar and was experiencing another growth spurt. The mess on the floor had swallowed the chair it had pushed and was working on the table. The sink had overflowed, burying the dish rack and sending a second cascade down to the floor. The firemen swore a bit more heartily than the police had, though it was understandable as the dough had grown significantly in the interim. One of the firemen was able to offer her some intelligent advice, suggesting she call a disaster relief service. Marjorie took this advice with alacrity and out of gratitude wrote down her recipe for bread, promising that under ordinary circumstances it resulted in excellent bread. By the time the insurance adjuster visited her, the growth of the dough had slowed, though it had not stopped. Instead, the kitchen was completely filled, and the dough was spreading into the dining room and out the window. The adjuster did not swear, at least until he was able to breathe normally. When he was done swearing, he called the disaster relief company himself and personally approved payment. In the meantime, a steady stream of reporters and photographers called on Marjorie to pay their respects. She became something of a celebrity, though the thing that brought her the greatest joy, beyond having her kitchen restored to working order, was a pair of visits by a biologist from a nearby university. On his first visit, he took a sample of the dough and brought it back to his laboratory to study it. On a second visit, a few weeks later, he was able to explain to her what had happened, that she had, quite accidentally, bred a new species of yeast, a hybrid strain that grew and reproduced at an astonishing rate. He had taken the liberty of naming it after her. By this time, Marjorie's kitchen had been professionally cleaned and put to order, though there was still a delicious scent remaining. Marjorie was laughing. "Well, at least it's over now." The biologist shook his head. "Over?" he said. "Oh dear, no. The Benning yeast is in the world now. As long as that dough was growing, the yeast was sending out spores. No doubt a good many of them got outdoors again and have been spreading far and wide." "Oh dear, I wouldn't worry. It may breed with other wild yeasts and evolve in a different direction. The odds of your experience repeating itself are fairly slim. Besides, there's a distinct possibility of money to be made here." Marjorie sat up straight. "Money? What do you mean?" The dentist smiled. "The Benning yeast grows faster than any yeast we've ever seen. I've got a culture growing in my lab. From that culture, we can breed it with a mind to developing a saleable product that could revolutionize the baking industry. Commercial bakers would certainly find it of interest. Home bakers like yourself could be attracted by it too. I think, Ms. Benning, we should engage an attorney and start putting together a business plan. Wouldn't you agree?" Thank you. And we have 10.5 minutes left.
Well, what about the picture?
Oh, well, I get to that in the last 5 minutes.
Oh, okay.
If no one calls, such as, in case they can't read the number, it's 664-4408. And you have 5 minutes to call. Come on, people. You must be sick of listening to the two of us droning on and on and on. And you must have some guess, a wild guess, even if you think it's the fish pond, which it isn't. But call in with that guess. Please give us a call. You have 9 minutes and a little over 30 seconds. Well, no, 4 minutes and about 30 seconds.
So this woman had an insurance policy that covered yeast destroying her house? I can
No.
imagine the insurance company saying, like, that's not covered under your policy.
But don't forget the insurance adjuster came and looked. I don't know any other way to deal with this.
Yes. She has a good insurance agent then.
Yes. So,
Well, can we...
what else is new in Adams?
New in Adams? The Adams Theater. They hope to eventually start playing movies there. They've had quite a program, over the summer of music. They had comedians, they had dancers, and it's been a great summer. I've spent most of my cultural...
Is it still owned by, is it Tilapia?
Nope, it's owned by Yina Moore, who's here by benefit of the Thomas Krenz project, the railroad project, railroad museum project.
Now, she did used to own that Tilapia. or whatever the name of it
No,
is.
she bought it from Nana Sinopoulos. Is that her name? Nana Sinopoulos. And Karen, Nina and Karen. They owned it. They used to own the theater and the Topia. And they've also bought
Topia.
they bought the Topia and it's now the Trail House. So they're operating that as well. So. And hopefully they'll show movies. That'd be great since we have no more movies. Only the Images in cinema in Williamstown is open. And they did a great business with the Barbie movie, I heard.
Well, hopefully
And-
one of the movies they will show is Miss Adams of Adams.
Yes.
Yes, I enjoyed watching that. I want to get it on a DVD.
It is one of the, according to the people at WCVB TV, that it is one of the oldest footage in existence in film. That because it was done on that kind of nitrate film that deteriorates. This film didn't deteriorate, but all the other films that were taken around that time, 1917 and then back to 1910 or so, were corroded and are worthless. But this movie is not. In this movie, as a story of how we got it, all these movies were stored somewhere at the Berkshire Mills. And when the Berkshire Mills closed in 1958, they told the man, John Babula, some maybe remember him, he was an instructor at McCann in the automotive program. They told him to clean out this room and throw all this stuff away. And he saw these films and he says, these are too valuable, we shouldn't. And so they were in his garage from 1958 until about 1974 when the Adams Historical Society was founded. And he brought them to the Historical Society and said, I have these movies taken in 1917, maybe you want them. And the Historical Society paid to have them reproduced to be put on safety film. And then since then, they've been digitized and still available today.
Yeah, that's great.
And the films were actually done by, through the benefit of one of the Plunkett sons, Theo Plunkett, who was also a state senator, who was also responsible for the Mount Greylock War Memorial. And he was sort of an artistic guy. He used to put on operettas. He staged Pirates of Penzance and HMS Pinafore in Adams and it toured. And so he's the one who got the movie company to come here and film these two movies. One was Miss Adams of Adams. The other one was the operations of the Berkshire Cotton Manufacturing Company.
I don't remember seeing that one.
That one's also online under Berkshire in the YouTube, Berkshire Mill Operations in Adams, something like that. Another one-reeler, 17-minute film that actually displays, performs all the cotton that comes in from a bale into finished product.
That's cool. I'd like to see that. So I'm going to explain the picture, unless you want to explain the picture.
No, it's your town, and it's.
All right, thank you.
I'll add to it.
And then I have an idea to throw your way. Dave, put the picture in front of us, please. Now, if you thought that this is Hoosick Valley Park in North Adams, near Hodges Crossroad, you were absolutely right. If you thought it was someplace else, you were wrong. And if you didn't have any idea where it was, well, you were also right. But you don't get bragging rights for that. This is the pond. This was located about where the Walmart parking lot is. And I know that because I got a hold of a North Adams map that actually had this on it. So I can see, where it's positioned.
You know why Hoosick Valley Park was established, right?
Yes,
okay.
by the trolley.
By the and it was to encourage people to take the trolley somewhere. And they said, we need a
On
desolate
the
place to go.
weekends.
We need to put on the weekends. You're right. I guess
Yes.
they had a band office
Because they'd still be
but-
running the trolleys, but had
get people to work.
virtually no customers.
Right.
So they gave them a place to go. And that is where the Mohawk Trail performance was held.
Oh, the big 1914 or 17.
Yeah,
that,
thereabouts.
The pageant.
Now, we can talk
the
about
pageant.
that another time.
Wow.
But we only have 3 minutes, so I want to throw this idea to you. Now, you just said,
Delayed.
I'm sorry, have you recovered? Yeah. You just said that Theo Plunkett got us the monument on Mount Greylock.
Yes.
And I think it would be a neat idea if you contacted the Park Service and got them to put a small monument to his memory, either on the outside or on the inside.
Oh, that's a good idea.
This is the member, the Adams native who served in the state legislature, who got this monument for everyone in Massachusetts.
The story is that there was money appropriated for a monument on top of Mount Greylock, but unfortunately, when they came to actually produce it, they needed another additional money. And Theo, according to the governor at the dedication speech of the monument, said that Theo buttonholed every single member in the General Court of Massachusetts to get them to support this bill. And the governor credited him with getting the bill passed and the money appropriated.
Yeah,
So
that
it wasn't
is a
his
neat
original
story.
idea, but he was instrumental in making it happen.
Yeah, so I think it's worth seeing if we can get something like a bronze tablet with him in bas relief to be put inside so that people can see this is the guy who brought it about.
Sounds like a good idea. We need another monument, and especially to him because he was one of those not really part of the money makers. He was more of the artist in the family.
So we have under a minute remaining. So thank you for coming tonight.
You're welcome.
And
My
I will
pleasure.
see you in 2 weeks.
Yes, I'll be back.
Yes. And thank you to both of you for watching, even though you didn't bother calling in. Dave, thank you for directing. We adore you. Don't worry, we won't hug you. Be sure to be here again in 2 weeks. So that'll be the 8th. That'll be the 15th, if I'm not mistaken.
Uh-oh, okay.
Yeah, Friday the 15th.
I'll check
Have
my
a
calendar.
wonderful night.